Your podcast, so-called The Oath, because not everybody knows this, but we all see a new president sworn in, raising their hand on usually on a Bible that means something to that president. But everyone that goes to work in the White House takes an oath too, and you swear that you could never be any sort of threat for blackmail that could endanger state secrets. You swear to protect the country. Did John Bolton uphold his oath to the country by saving all of these very serious allegations for a book?
Well, you promise to serve and protect the Constitution, not a particular person. I mean, that's the power of our oath, Nicolle, that it's not to an individual or to a president, it's to the Constitution of the United States. Look, I don't think it was a bright, shining moment for Bolton to withhold this information during the impeachment inquiry and to unleash it in a book. It may be true, it may be false. It tends to sound exactly like something that Donald Trump would do, and so I, like Adam Schiff, credit it, but it would have been really nice to have heard about it when it really mattered.
But as Adam Schiff said, this is new, firsthand, a witness with firsthand knowledge of conduct so corrupt that he picked up the phone and called the Attorney General about Donald Trump's dealings with Turkey and China. Are you curious to know what William Barr did after he hung up?
Oh, very much so. Look, I think Bolton is a witness to additional obstruction of justice by the President of the United States. Volume 2 of the Mueller report is about Donald Trump's obstruction of justice, and it sounds like we have more of it, and John Bolton knows about it. And we've talked many times on your show, Nicolle, that you can't charge a sitting president, but you sure can charge a former president. Now, what Bill Barr did with it is a completely different question. Bolton will know what he told Barr. Bolton will not know all the other details, what Barr said, what Barr did, whether or not these cases were viable on their own or Barr interceded. All really important questions, and we need to ask them. But John Bolton has direct evidence of what Donald Trump said and did, and he has indirect evidence of what Bill Barr said and did.
Michael Steele, let's talk about the human being that John Bolton describes in the pages of his book. He describes a president who encouraged Chinese President Xi to build concentration camps, said it was a good idea. He asked if Finland was part of Russia. I've read some of the Ukraine section. It is, I think Bolton says this, Trump's conduct is worse than the conduct for which he was impeached and acquitted. I am still capable of, and maybe this is shame on me, being shocked and disgusted anew by descriptions of Donald Trump. But what's amazing to me is John Bolton saw this version of Donald Trump that he writes about in 592 pages on day one. They said bad things about Donald Trump behind his back on day one. There is a little community of fellow abused staffers at the highest levels of the White House staff. That's what comes through on the pages of John Bolton's book.
Yeah, it is Stockholm syndrome-like, where people somehow, maybe they come in just enamored of being in the West Wing and caught up in the moment, the presidency, the president. But then the hard, ugly truth comes crashing down and you feel trapped and maybe you can't get out. Bolton had an escape hatch. It was called impeachment, where he could have, I think in that moment, served his country in a manner unlike any who have gone before him, and shared and verified, Nicolle, a lot of what was suspicion, a lot of, secret Washington talk, which we now see it was true. And a lot of the information that was coming out from others who have been served in written books, to individuals like Anonymous, who still will likely have more information to drop over the course of the summer. He could have put all of that in firm context for us. He could have been a clarifying voice for the American people, which is why I'm not all jacked up about the book and rushing out to buy a copy of it. I've enjoyed the time I worked with John Bolton. I've enjoyed our conversations in the past, but I thought this was a missed moment for him. And I'm not willing to pay $29.95 to relive that moment and to learn more about it. Let those officials who in a post-Trump period want to use that as evidence for some other actions later on, have at it. But I think that moment was lost in January and during the impeachment time, where he could have, without being forced under subpoena, to come forward and share with the country, this is what I know, and this is the man you need to know about.
I mean, Ashley Parker, it's a very fair, and Michael Steele is putting it more diplomatically than I think a lot of people feel about it. It's a very fair point. If he is so bad that he's not fit, and if you work in the White House, you know that fitness is the basic standard to seek the presidency and retain the presidency. Bolton has said in that interview that we aired that he is not fit for the office he holds. Right. Bob Corker was, until now, the closest person to Donald Trump to ever say that on air. And I remember the statement. He was at home in Tennessee, and he said, to this moment, I have not seen Donald Trump display the fitness for the office that he holds. John Bolton becomes the second person to call him fundamentally unfit. Rod Rosenstein was reported on multiple occasions to have offered to wear a wire and to have whipped votes for the 25th Amendment. The people closest to Donald Trump, through a lot of great reporting from your paper and others, have concluded at various times that he represents a threat to the country he leads.
Yeah, and if you believe John Bolton's account, and many people, again, do say it's very credible, there's no heroes in the account, right? Because you have a president who in many ways is behaving incredibly poorly, putting his political interests above all else. And then you have someone like John Bolton who waits to come forward until he has a very lucrative book deal. John Bolton sort of goes through and explains his own somewhat convoluted logic as to why he wouldn't testify before the House, but he would have testified before the Senate had he been called. But of course, he was not called. But I think what administration officials find in those situations is, A, it requires a lot of courage to come forward. And that is in short supply. And then there's a slightly more charitable explanation for some, which is you get in there thinking it can't possibly be as bad as people say is one thing you've heard. And then you realize it is. And you feel as if, but if I were to leave, it would be even worse. Right. And, am I sort of a God complex? Am I helping prevent, you think this is bad, but you should have seen the executive order we took off his desk, or you should have seen the speech draft we finally got him not to give. And I believe in John Bolton's book, he recounts a scene that stayed with me, which was him talking to General Kelly, then the chief of staff, and General Kelly saying, look at how he makes decisions. Imagine if President Trump makes decisions in some sort of true crisis, right? Like the aftermath of 9/11. And I do think what we are seeing now is the president in not just one true crisis, the coronavirus, but two true crises, racial unrest across the nation. And you are seeing how he's making decisions. And for many people, it's leaving much to be desired.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.